You know, when we talk about adolescents with problematic sexual behaviors, the conversation usually gets boiled down to one single story. But what if that story is missing the most important part? Today, we're diving into some fascinating research that shows there isn't just one story, there are many. And figuring out those differences is absolutely the key to a more effective and a more just approach.
All right, so let's start with an idea that's pretty well established in our legal and treatment systems. Adolescents are not just mini adults. It's a simple fact, right? Their brains are still developing, their lives are totally different, so it makes sense that our approach to them has to be fundamentally different from how we treat adults. That's our starting point.
But here's where it gets really interesting. What if we flip the script a little bit and ask a tougher question? What if the most important differences aren't between the adults and the kids, but between the kids themselves? This is the point where that one simple story really starts to fall apart.
And that brings us right to the heart of what we're talking about today, heterogeneity. I know, it's a bit of a sciencey term, but all it means is that this group of young people is incredibly diverse. So trying to treat them all the same way is not just going to be ineffective, it's a complete misunderstanding of what's going on.
Think about it like this. A fever is just a symptom, right? It's not the actual illness. It could be a virus, a bacterial infection, who knows? You wouldn't just give everyone with a fever the same pill. No way. You have to figure out the cause to find the right cure. And that exact same logic applies here.
And this quote from the research just nails the central challenge. The variation isn't just between different groups, it's also massive within this one group of adolescents. This is the incredible complexity that researchers are trying to get their arms around.
Okay, so if we agree that we have to understand the underlying causes, the big question is, where do we even start to look? Well, the scientific field that gives us a map for this is called etiology.
Etiology is way more than just a simple list of risk factors. It's more like creating a super detailed map of a person's life journey. It helps us see the unique mix of experiences from their childhood history to their personal struggles that brought them to right here, right now.
Now, when researchers look at these life maps, some common themes tend to pop up. Things like early trauma, what's going on with the family, social skills, how they regulate their emotions. These often play a huge role. But, and this is the most important part, the way these things combine and how intense they are is totally unique for every single person.
A really powerful example of this is the role of trauma. The research is so clear on this. Adolescents with these specific behaviors have experienced way higher rates of trauma and abuse compared to kids involved in other kinds of offenses. A single factor like that can completely change a young person's path in life.
This all leads researchers to what they call a probabilistic perspective. I know, it sounds complicated, but it basically means there's no magic checklist. You can't just tick 5 boxes and say, aha, that's the reason. It's so much more like a complex chemical reaction where mixing different elements together creates a totally unique result every single time.
So if every case is its own unique chemical reaction, how in the world can we make sense of it all? Well, the answer is to shift our focus. We need to move away from just trying to predict risk and start working to truly understand each person's needs. And for that, we need a whole different set of tools.
And here you can see the two main types of tools in action. On one hand, you have risk assessments. They're built to answer one question: how likely is this person to reoffend? They spit out a number. But typology tools, they ask a totally different set of questions, like what's this person's story? What are their unique motivations and needs? They give you a rich profile that can actually guide treatment.
So how do researchers create these profiles, these typologies? They use this really sophisticated statistical tool called Latent Class Analysis, or LCA. Just think of it like a superpowered pattern finder. Instead of looking at one factor at a time, LCA crunches all the data at once to find these hidden subgroups of people who actually share a similar story. So let's look at an example of what it finds. One study using LCA found 4 completely distinct subgroups. And what jumps out right away? There is no single typical profile. The biggest group is still less than half the total. Each of these groups has a totally unique pattern, which points to really different needs and challenges. And check this out. Here's another study that looked at a different set of factors and found 3 entirely different subgroups. This is so important because it just hammers home that central message. The groups you find depend on the questions you ask. There is no single story.
Okay, so this scientific understanding is getting more and more detailed, and it's completely changing how we think about treatment. But, and this is a huge but, it also shines a bright light on a really serious and dangerous disconnect happening at a much higher level. And this brings us to a major problem.
While therapists and clinicians are using these very personalized, evidence-based approaches, the legal system is often way behind. The laws and policies still tend to work on that old, broken, one-size-fits-all model.
This timeline just lays it all out. For decades, the research has been screaming about the complexity here. Treatment methods have started to catch up and adapt, but the legal system, the very framework that governs these situations, it's been so much slower to change, and it's often still stuck on outdated ideas.
And this isn't just an academic debate. It has real-world consequences. As this research points out, when the legal system uses these super broad, simplistic labels, it can actually end up hurting its own goals of keeping people safe and helping them get better.
So, what's the bottom line? Where do we go from here? It really comes down to 4 key steps. First, we have to ditch this idea of a single monolithic group. It just doesn't exist. Second, our focus has to be on understanding the unique causes in every single case. Third, we have to use the right tools for the job, tools that help us understand needs, not just predict risk. And finally, and maybe most urgently, we have to close that gap between what the science tells us and what our laws actually do.
And all of this leaves us with one final massive question. We now know, with more certainty than ever, that every case is unique, and a one-size-fits-all approach is a recipe for failure. So the challenge now, for all of us, is to figure out how to build a system that can actually see the individual person behind the label. A system that is smart enough to be effective and compassionate enough to be truly just.